The crisp November air bit through Marcus Donovan's tailored wool coat as he stepped out of his midnight blue Tesla Model S, the cemetery gates looming before him like sentinels guarding secrets of the past. As the founder and CEO of Donovan Tech Solutions, a company worth over $3 billion, Marcus commanded respect in boardrooms across Silicon Valley. But here, among the weathered headstones and bare oak trees, his wealth meant nothing. Here he was just a man carrying 3 years of unhealed grief. Today marked exactly 3 years since Elena's passing, and like every year before, Marcus made this solitary journey to honor the woman who had been his anchor in a world of endless ambition. But as he approached Elena's marble headstone, something stopped him cold. 2 small figures sat huddled together beside the grave, their thin shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Twin boys, no more than 6 or 7 years old, clung to each other in the shadow of his wife's memorial. When they looked up at him with tear-streaked faces, Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis. Their eyes, those unmistakable green eyes, were identical to Eleanor's. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you boys doing here?" The first twin, slightly taller than his brother, wiped his nose with a dirty sleeve before answering with words that would shatter everything Marcus thought he knew about his late wife. "We're visiting our mama," the boy said simply. "She told us to come here if we ever needed her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Marcus Donovan stared at the 2 children before him, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. The November wind whipped through the cemetery, scattering dead leaves across the polished marble of Elena's headstone, but Marcus barely noticed the cold. His focus was entirely consumed by the impossible sight before him. 2 boys who claimed his deceased wife as their mother. The twins appeared to be around 6 years old, with sandy brown hair that caught the weak afternoon sunlight, and those striking green eyes that had haunted Marcus's dreams since Elena's death. They were dressed in clothes that had seen better days, worn jeans with patches at the knees, thin jackets that offered little protection against the harsh weather, and sneakers that were clearly too small for their growing feet. "Your mama?" Marcus repeated, his voice hoarse with disbelief. He crouched down to their eye level, studying their faces more carefully. The resemblance to Elena was undeniable, not just the eyes, but the shape of their noses, the way their mouths curved, slightly downward when they were sad. It was like looking at miniature versions of the woman he had loved more than life itself. The second twin, quieter and more reserved than his brother, nodded solemnly. "Elena Donovan," he whispered, pointing to the name engraved in elegant script on the headstone. "That's our mama's name. She used to visit us before she went to heaven." Marcus felt his legs give way slightly, and he had to steady himself against the cool marble. Elena had visited these children. When? How? During their 5 years of marriage, she had never mentioned having children, never spoke of any previous relationships that might have resulted in offspring. They had discussed starting a family countless times, but Elena had always insisted they wait until the company was more stable, until they had more time to dedicate to raising children properly. "What are your names?" Marcus managed to ask, his business instincts kicking in even as his personal world crumbled around him. "I'm Jake," said the taller twin, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke. "And this is my brother Luke. We're twins, but we're not exactly the same. I'm 7 minutes older." Luke, still clinging to his brother's arm, added quietly, "We live at Sunshine Children's Home with Miss Patricia, but sometimes we come here when we miss Mama too much." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sunshine Children's Home was located across town, in a modest neighborhood that Marcus had driven through countless times on his way to business meetings. Elena had been involved in various charitable organizations during their marriage, but she had never mentioned this particular facility. Had she been supporting these children financially? Had she been visiting them regularly while maintaining a facade of normalcy at home? Marcus's hands trembled as he reached into his coat pocket for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found his private investigator's number. Thomas Reed had worked for Donovan Tech Solutions for years, handling sensitive corporate matters with discretion and efficiency. If anyone could uncover the truth about these boys and their connection to Elena, it was Thomas. "Boys," Marcus said, forcing his voice to remain calm and gentle. "How did you get here today? It's quite far from the children's home." Jake and Luke exchanged a glance that spoke of shared secrets and unspoken understanding. Jake answered for both of them. "We took the bus. We saved our allowance money for weeks to buy tickets. Miss Patricia thinks we're at the library, but we couldn't stay away today. It's Mama's Angel Day." Marcus frowned, confused by the terminology. "Angel Day?" "The day she became an angel," Luke explained, his voice barely audible. 3 years ago, she promised she would always watch over us, even from heaven. We come here every year to tell her about our school and to ask her to help us find a real family." The innocent explanation struck Marcus with overwhelming force. These children had been grieving Elena's death for 3 years, just as he had. They had been making this pilgrimage annually, sitting beside her grave and sharing their hopes and dreams with a woman who could no longer respond. The thought of them scraping together bus fare from their meager allowances just to visit their mother's resting place broke something deep inside Marcus's chest. "Tell me about your visits with Elena," Marcus said, settling more comfortably on the ground beside them. The expensive fabric of his suit would be ruined by the damp earth, but he no longer cared about such trivial concerns. "When did you last see her?" Jake's face brightened slightly at the question. "She came to see us every month until she got really sick. She would bring us books and help us with our homework. She was really smart. She knew about computers and numbers and all sorts of things. She used to read us stories before bedtime," Luke added, his voice gaining strength as he remembered happier times. "She had the most beautiful voice, and she would sing us to sleep sometimes. She said we were her special boys and that she loved us more than all the stars in the sky." Marcus closed his eyes, trying to reconcile these memories with the woman he thought he had known completely. Elena had indeed possessed a beautiful singing voice, something she rarely shared with others. She had been brilliant with technology and mathematics, qualities that had initially attracted Marcus to her when they met at a tech conference 7 years ago. But she had shared these intimate moments with children he never knew existed. Did she ever mention anyone else? Marcus asked carefully. A husband or someone important in her life? The twins shook their heads in unison. "She said she had people who cared about her," Jake replied, "but that her life was complicated. She never wanted to talk about the sad stuff. She always wanted to focus on us and make sure we were happy and doing well in school." The revelation that Elena had compartmentalized her life so completely left Marcus reeling. She had maintained an entire relationship with these children while never once mentioning their existence to him. The deception felt like a betrayal, yet looking at Jake and Luke's innocent faces, he couldn't bring himself to feel anger toward them. They were victims in this situation just as much as he was. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Thomas Reed's name appeared on the screen, and Marcus realized he must have inadvertently dialed the number while fumbling with his phone earlier. "Mr. Donovan," Thomas's professional voice came through clearly. "I see I have a missed call from you. Is everything all right?" "Thomas, I need you to meet me at Riverside Cemetery immediately," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "And I need you to bring everything you can find about Sunshine Children's Home. Focus on 2 boys named Jake and Luke, twins, approximately 6 or 7 years old." "Sir," Is this related to a security concern? Thomas asked, his tone shifting to high alert. No, Marcus replied, looking at the two boys who were listening intently to his conversation. This is personal, very personal, and Thomas, absolute discretion on this matter. After ending the call, Marcus turned his attention back to Jake and Luke. The afternoon was growing colder, and he noticed both boys shivering despite their attempts to appear brave. Are you boys hungry? He asked. There's a diner not far from here. We could get some hot chocolate and something to eat while we wait for my friend to arrive. Luke's eyes lit up at the mention of hot chocolate, but Jake remained cautious. Miss Patricia says we're not supposed to go anywhere with strangers, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. That's very smart advice, Marcus agreed. But I'm not exactly a stranger, am I? I loved Elena too. That makes us family of sorts. The word family seemed to resonate with both boys. They had been searching for a family, as they had mentioned, and here was someone who shared their connection to the woman they both mourned. After a moment of silent communication between the twins, Jake nodded. Okay, he said, but we need to be back before dark. Miss Patricia worries when we're late. As they walked toward Marcus's Tesla, he couldn't help but notice how the boys marveled at the vehicle's sleek design and advanced features. When he opened the rear doors, they climbed in with the careful reverence of children who had rarely experienced luxury. This is the nicest car I've ever been in, Luke whispered to his brother, running his small hands over the leather seats. The drive to the diner was filled with quiet conversation as Marcus learned more about the twins' daily lives. They attended the local public school, where both boys excelled academically despite their challenging circumstances. Jake had a particular aptitude for mathematics, while Luke showed artistic talents that reminded Marcus painfully of Elena's creative side. At the diner, Marcus watched as the boys ordered modest meals, despite his encouragement to choose whatever they wanted. Their manners were impeccable, suggesting that Elena had indeed played a role in their upbringing. They ate slowly, savoring each bite as if uncertain when their next good meal might come. Mr. Marcus, Jake said suddenly, using the informal address that seemed natural to him. Are you going to send us back to the home now that you know about us? The question revealed a deep-seated fear that broke Marcus's heart. These children had learned not to expect permanence in their lives, not to count on adult promises or commitments. They had experienced enough disappointment to approach new relationships with caution and self-protection. I'm not going to send you anywhere, Marcus assured them. But I do need to understand more about your situation and your connection to Elena. There are things I need to figure out before I can make any decisions about the future. Thomas Reed arrived at the diner as they were finishing their meal, his professional demeanor softening slightly when he saw the two young boys sitting across from his employer. Marcus had worked with Thomas for over 5 years, and the investigator had never seen his typically composed boss look so emotionally shaken. Mr. Donovan, Thomas said quietly, taking a seat at their booth. I've made some preliminary calls. Sunshine Children's Home confirmed that Jake and Luke Martinez have been residents there for approximately 4 years. They were brought in as toddlers with no known family members. Marcus noted the surname, Martinez, and filed it away for future investigation. What about their connection to Elena? Thomas glanced at the boys, who were listening intently, despite their young age. Perhaps we should discuss the details privately. No, Marcus said firmly. These boys have a right to know what's being said about their lives. They've been through enough uncertainty. Thomas nodded, consulting his notes. Elena Donovan was listed as an approved visitor for both children. She had legal authorization to take them on outings and was involved in their educational planning. The records show monthly visits dating back 3.5 years, ending approximately 6 months before her death. The timeline aligned with what the boys had told him. But it raised new questions about Eleanor's motivations and the legal framework that had allowed her such intimate involvement in their lives. Marcus realized that his wife had not only hidden these children from him, but had also gone through official channels to establish a relationship with them. As the evening grew darker and the boys began to show signs of fatigue, Marcus knew he needed to return them to the children's home. But first, he had one more question that had been gnawing at him since their first meeting. "Boys," he said gently, "do you know anything about your father? Or how you came to be at the children's home?" Jake and Luke exchanged another one of their meaningful glances before Jake answered. "Miss Patricia said our daddy couldn't take care of us when we were little. She said Mama Eleanor stepped in to help because she cared about us, but we don't remember much from before the home." The pieces of a complex puzzle were beginning to form in Marcus's mind, but the complete picture remained frustratingly out of reach. As they prepared to leave the diner, Luke tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Mr. Marcus," the quieter twin said, "will we see you again? Or is this goodbye like with Mama?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with hope and fear in equal measure. Marcus looked down at these two little boys who had appeared in his life like ghosts from Elena's hidden past, and he knew that regardless of the complicated emotions swirling within him, he could not simply walk away. "You'll see me again," he promised, meaning every word. "That's a guarantee. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. The drive back to Sunshine Children's Home took place in contemplative silence, broken only by the twins' occasional whispered conversations in the back seat. Marcus found himself stealing glances in the rearview mirror, still struggling to process the reality that these two boys existed, children who had shared a bond with Eleanor that he never knew about. The children's home occupied a modest two-story building in a working-class neighborhood, its brick facade showing signs of age, but maintained with obvious care. A small playground sat adjacent to the main building, where a few older children were playing basketball under the glow of overhead lights. As Marcus parked his Tesla, several curious faces appeared at the windows, clearly intrigued by the expensive vehicle. "That's Miss Patricia," Jake said, pointing to a woman emerging from the front entrance. She was in her early 50s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and wearing scrubs that suggested she had just finished her shift at a second job. Her expression shifted from concern to confusion as she recognized the twins climbing out of an unfamiliar luxury car. "Jake, Luke," Patricia called out, her voice carrying both relief and mild irritation. "Where have you been? I've been worried sick. You were supposed to be back from the library 2 hours ago." Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand in introduction. "Ms. Patricia, I'm Marcus Donovan. I found the boys at Riverside Cemetery this afternoon. They were visiting my wife's grave." Patricia's expression changed instantly from irritation to something more complex, recognition mixed with surprise and a hint of wariness. She shook Marcus's hand cautiously, her eyes studying his face as if trying to place him in a context she understood. "Mr. Donovan," she repeated slowly. "Elena's husband." The simple acknowledgement hit Marcus like a physical blow. This woman knew about him, knew about his relationship to Eleanor, yet he had never heard her name mentioned once during his marriage. How many people had been part of Eleanor's secret world while he remained completely oblivious? "Could we speak privately?" Marcus asked, glancing at the twins who were listening intently to every word. "There are some things I need to understand about my wife's involvement with Jake and Luke." Patricia nodded, her professional demeanor taking over. "Boys, go inside and get started on your homework. I'll be up to check on you in a little while." She turned to Marcus. "We can talk in my office." The interior of Sunshine Children's Home was clean, but clearly operating on a tight budget. The furniture was mismatched but functional, and the walls were covered with children's artwork and motivational Posters. Patricia led Marcus to a small office off the main lobby, closing the door behind them. "I wondered when you might show up," Patricia said, settling behind her desk. "Elena always said you were a good man, but that the timing wasn't right for you to know about the boys." Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his business instincts demanding direct answers. What exactly was Elena's relationship to Jake and Luke? "The boys say she's their mother, but that's impossible. We were married for 5 years, and she never mentioned having children." Patricia's expression softened with sympathy. "Mr. Donovan, Elena didn't give birth to those boys, but in every way that mattered, she was their mother. She saved them from a situation that would have destroyed them." "What kind of situation?" Marcus pressed, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to. "Know the answer?" Patricia opened a filing cabinet and retrieved a thick folder, placing it on the desk between them. 4 years ago, Jake and Luke were found abandoned in a hotel room downtown. Their biological father had left them alone for 3 days with no food and no supervision. They were malnourished, scared, and had clearly been neglected for months. Marcus felt his stomach clench at the image of 2 3-year-old boys left to fend for themselves. "What happened to the father?" "Arrested on drug charges," Patricia replied matter-of-factly. "He's serving a 10-year sentence in federal prison. The boys have no other known relatives, no one willing to take responsibility for them. They were placed in emergency care, and that's when Elena first encountered them." "How?" Marcus asked, struggling to piece together the timeline. Patricia smiled slightly, the first genuine warmth she had shown since their conversation began. "Eleanor was volunteering with our literacy program. She came in twice a week to read to the younger children. Jake and Luke were difficult cases. They had trust issues, behavioral problems, nightmares. Most volunteers struggled to connect with them. Marcus could envision Elena in that setting, patient, gentle, determined to break through whatever barriers the traumatized children had erected. It aligned with the qualities that had drawn him to her in the first place. But Elena was different, Patricia continued. She didn't try to rush them or force interactions. She would just sit with them, read stories, and gradually they began to respond. Within 6 months, they were calling her Mama and asking when she would visit next. "And she never told me any of this," Marcus said, more to himself than to Patricia. "She wanted to," Patricia assured him. "Elena talked about you constantly. She was torn between wanting to bring the boys into your life and protecting them from potential disappointment if things didn't work out. She said you were focused on building your company, and that adding 2 traumatized children to the mix might be overwhelming." The explanation stung because it contained elements of truth that Marcus couldn't deny. 4 years ago, Donovan Tech Solutions had been in the midst of a crucial expansion phase. He had been working 18-hour days, traveling constantly, and admittedly had little patience for distractions from his business goals. Would he have been receptive to Elena's request to essentially adopt 2 troubled children? The honest answer made him uncomfortable. What were the legal arrangements? Marcus asked, shifting to more practical concerns. Patricia consulted the file before answering. Elena petitioned the court to become their official guardian. The process took nearly a year, but she was eventually granted legal authority to make decisions about their welfare, education, and medical care. She set up a trust fund for their future needs and visited them regularly. Marcus absorbed this information with growing amazement at Elena's commitment to these children. She had navigated complex legal procedures, dedicated significant time and resources, and maintained consistent involvement in their lives, all while keeping their existence completely hidden from him. "Where did she tell you she was going during these visits?" Patricia asked, clearly curious about how Elena had managed the deception. Marcus thought back over the years, trying to recall Elena's explanations for her absences. "Charity work," he admitted. She was involved with several organizations. I never questioned the details because I trusted her judgment about how to spend her time. She wasn't lying, Patricia pointed out. This was charity work, just more personal than you. Realized? A knock on the office door interrupted their conversation. Jake's voice called through the door. "Miss Patricia? Luke's not feeling good. He says his stomach hurts." Patricia sighed, standing up from her desk. "I need to check on him. Would you like to come up? You might be able to help. Luke tends to get anxious when he's worried about something." Marcus followed Patricia up a narrow staircase to the children's dormitory area. The second floor was divided into several rooms, each housing multiple children of different ages. Patricia led him to a room where they found Luke sitting on one of 4 twin beds, his face pale and his arms wrapped around his stomach. Jake sat beside his brother, gently rubbing his back in a gesture that spoke of countless similar episodes. "He gets sick when he's scared," Jake explained to Marcus. "He's worried you're going to disappear like Mama did." The innocent observation hit Marcus with unexpected force. These children had learned to expect loss, to anticipate abandonment, even when forming new connections. Luke's physical symptoms were manifestations of psychological trauma that ran deeper than Marcus had initially understood. "Luke," Marcus said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed opposite the twins. "I'm not going anywhere. I promised you earlier, and I keep my promises." Luke looked up with Elena's green eyes, searching Marcus's face for signs of deception. "Mama promised too," he whispered, "but then she got sick and couldn't visit anymore." The parallel between Elena's illness and Marcus's potential departure hadn't occurred to him, but it made perfect sense from a child's perspective. Both adults had represented stability and care, and Elena's death had reinforced their belief that important people inevitably disappeared from their lives. "Your mama didn't choose to leave you," Marcus explained carefully. "She was very sick, and sometimes when people are that sick they can't control what happens to them. But I'm healthy, and I'm choosing to be part of your lives. That's different." Patricia watched this interaction with interest, clearly evaluating Marcus's suitability as a potential permanent figure in the boys' lives. "Mr. Donovan," she said quietly, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" They stepped into the hallway, leaving Jake to comfort his brother. Patricia's expression was serious but hopeful. "Those boys have been through more trauma than most adults could handle," she said, "but Elena gave them something precious, the experience of being loved unconditionally. If you're serious about being involved in their lives, you need to understand that it's not a casual commitment. They need stability, patience, and someone who won't give up on them when things get difficult." Marcus nodded, recognizing the weight of what she was saying. What would that involvement look like practically? "I assume there are legal procedures, background checks, evaluations?" "There would be," Patricia confirmed, "but Elena laid a lot of groundwork. She always hoped that someday you and the boys would find each other. She even left specific instructions about what should happen if something happened to her." This revelation stopped Marcus cold. "Instructions? What kind of instructions?" Patricia smiled slightly. "Elena was nothing if not thorough. She left a sealed letter with me to be opened only if you ever came looking for the boys. Would you like to read it?" The idea of receiving a message from Elena, written while she was still alive and planning for contingencies he never knew existed, both thrilled and terrified Marcus. "Yes," he said without hesitation, "I need to read it." As they returned to Patricia's office, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Reed. "Background check on children's home complete. Financial records show monthly deposits from Elena's personal account dating back 4 years. Also found something interesting about the boy's father. Need to meet ASAP," Marcus quickly typed back. "Tomorrow morning, my office. Bring everything you've found." Patricia handed him a sealed envelope with his name written in Elena's familiar handwriting. The paper felt heavy in his hands, as if it contained more than just words, as if it held the key to understanding the woman he thought he had known completely. "Take your time," Patricia said gently. "You can read it here or take it with you. But Mr. Donovan, whatever Elena wrote in that letter, remember that she loved you deeply. Everything she did was motivated by love, for you and for those boys." Marcus stared at the envelope, Eleanor's handwriting blurring slightly as unexpected. Emotions welled up in his eyes. Tomorrow he would learn what Thomas had discovered about the boy's father. Tonight he would finally hear Elena's explanation for the secret she had carried throughout their marriage. But first, he needed to say goodnight to two little boys who were learning to trust again, despite every reason they had to protect their hearts from further disappointment. Marcus sat in his study at home, the sealed envelope from Elena resting unopened on his mahogany desk. The penthouse overlooked the city skyline, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view that usually brought him peace. Tonight, however, the familiar space felt hollow and unfamiliar, as if the revelations of the day had altered the very foundation of his reality. The weight of Elena's letter seemed disproportionate to its physical presence. Inside those pages lay answers to questions he hadn't even known to ask during their marriage. What had motivated her to become so deeply involved with Jake and Luke? Why had she felt compelled to hide their existence from him? And perhaps, most importantly, what had she wanted him to do if he ever discovered the truth? With trembling fingers, Marcus broke the seal and unfolded several handwritten pages. Eleanor's elegant script filled the sheets, and just seeing her handwriting again brought a wave of grief so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. He took a steadying breath and began to read. "My dearest Marcus, if you're reading this letter, it means that Jake and Luke have found their way to you, just as I always hoped they would. I know you must be confused, hurt, and probably angry at the deception I've maintained throughout our marriage. You have every right to feel betrayed, but please hear me out before you make any judgments about my choices. 4 years ago, I encountered two little boys who were broken in ways that most people couldn't comprehend. They had been abandoned, neglected, and traumatized by the one person who should have protected them above all others. When I first saw them at Sunshine Children's Home, they reminded me so much of myself at that age, lost, scared, and desperately needing someone to believe in them." Marcus paused, his brow furrowing. Elena had rarely spoken about her childhood, always deflecting questions about her family with vague references to a difficult upbringing. He had assumed it was simply painful for her to discuss, but this letter suggested deeper wounds than he had realized. "You see, my love, I was once like Jake and Luke. My own father abandoned our family when I was 7 years old, leaving my mother to struggle with addiction and depression. I spent 3 years in foster care before my aunt finally took me in. I know what it feels like to wonder if you're worthy of love, to believe that everyone you care about will eventually leave you. When I met Jake and Luke, I saw myself reflected in their eyes. They were so small, so vulnerable, and yet trying so hard to be brave. I couldn't walk away from them, Marcus. My heart wouldn't let me." Marcus set the letter down for a moment, processing this revelation about Elena's past. She had never mentioned foster care or family instability. During their relationship, she had spoken occasionally about an aunt who raised her, but had always portrayed it as a normal arrangement following her parents' death in an accident. The reality was clearly far more complex and traumatic. He picked up the letter again, eager to understand more. "I know you're wondering why I didn't tell you about them from the beginning. The truth is, I was terrified. We were building something beautiful together. Your company was thriving, our marriage was strong, and we were talking about starting our own family someday. I was afraid that bringing two traumatized children into our lives would disrupt that harmony. But more than that, I was afraid you might see them as a burden rather than a blessing. Your dedication to Donovan Tech Solutions is one of the things I love most about you. Your drive, your ambition, your unwillingness to accept failure. But I worried that you might view Jake and Luke as complications that would interfere with your goals. Marcus winced at the accuracy of Elena's assessment. 4 years ago, he had been laser-focused on expanding his company, often working late, into the night and traveling extensively. Would he have been receptive to the idea of taking on two troubled children? The honest answer made him uncomfortable. I want you to know that hiding them from you was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every time I returned from visiting them, I wanted to tell you about their progress, their funny observations, their small victories. Jake's incredible aptitude for mathematics reminded me so much of you, and Luke's artistic talents always made me think about how you might nurture his creativity. As time went on, the deception became more difficult to maintain, but I was also witnessing something miraculous. These two broken little boys were healing, slowly but surely. They were learning to trust again, to hope again, to believe that they deserved love. I couldn't risk disrupting that progress by introducing uncertainty about their future. I had planned to tell you everything on our 6th anniversary. I had even started preparing you by mentioning my interest in adoption and my work with at-risk children. But then the diagnosis came, and suddenly time became a luxury I didn't have. Marcus's throat tightened as he remembered Elena's battle with cancer. The aggressive form of the disease had progressed rapidly, leaving little time for long-term planning or difficult conversations. She had spent her final months focused on practical matters, organizing her affairs, saying goodbye to loved ones, and apparently preparing for a future where Jake and Luke might need to find their way to him. Marcus, I need you to understand that those boys are not a burden or an obligation. They are a gift. Jake will challenge you intellectually with his curiosity and his brilliant mind. Luke will teach you about compassion and creativity in ways you never expected. Together, they will show you a kind of love that isn't based on achievement or success, but simply on being present and caring. I've made legal arrangements to make things easier if you choose to become part of their lives. The guardianship papers are filed with Patricia, and there's a trust fund established for their education and basic needs. But Marcus, I want you to know that you have a choice. If you don't feel ready or capable of taking on this responsibility, Patricia has identified several excellent families who would welcome Jake and Luke. However, if you do choose to open your heart to them, you'll discover what I learned 4 years ago, that love multiplies rather than divides. Caring for Jake and Luke didn't diminish my love for you, it enhanced it. Watching you become a father figure to them would be the greatest gift you could give me, even though I won't be there to witness it. Please be patient with them, my darling. They've experienced more loss than any child should have to endure. They may test your commitment, not because they don't want your love, but because they're afraid to believe in it. Show them through your actions that you're not going anywhere, and you'll be rewarded with a loyalty and affection that will astound you. I love you more than words can express, Marcus. Thank you for giving me the happiest years of my life. I pray that Jake and Luke can bring you even a fraction of the joy they brought me. Forever yours, Elena P.S. Ask Jake about his theory regarding prime numbers and pizza slices. You'll be amazed by his logical reasoning. And encourage Luke's art. There's a set of professional drawing supplies hidden in my closet that I bought for his birthday before I got too sick to visit. Marcus set the letter down with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the complexity of emotions Elena's words had unleashed. Love, grief, admiration and regret warred within him as he processed her revelations. She had carried so much pain from her own childhood, had shouldered the responsibility of caring for Jake and Luke alone, and had done it all while maintaining the marriage and supporting his career ambitions. The sound of his phone ringing interrupted his contemplation. Thomas Reed's name appeared on the screen, and Marcus realized it was nearly midnight. "Thomas, it's late. Can this wait until morning?" "I'm afraid not, Mr. Donovan," Thomas replied, his voice unusually tense. "I've uncovered something about Jake and Luke's father that changes everything. You need to know this before you make any decisions about those boys." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of something? "The father's name is Diego Martinez. He's currently serving time in federal prison, as Patricia told you. But Marcus, there's more. Diego Martinez is the younger brother of Carlos Martinez." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Carlos Martinez was the former head of research and development at Donovan Tech Solutions, a brilliant engineer who had been Marcus's right-hand man during the company's early years. Carlos had left the company abruptly 3 years ago under mysterious circumstances, claiming he needed to focus on family obligations. "Are you telling me that Jake and Luke are Carlos's nephews?" Marcus asked, his mind racing through the implications. "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Thomas confirmed. "And there's more. I've been digging through financial records, and it appears that Carlos has been making monthly payments to Sunshine Children's Home for the past year. He's been supporting those boys financially, even though he's never visited them or acknowledged the relationship publicly." Marcus sank into his desk chair, trying to process this new layer of complexity. Carlos Martinez had been more than just an employee. He had been a friend, someone Marcus had trusted with proprietary information and strategic decisions. If Carlos knew about Jake and Luke's situation, why hadn't he ever mentioned it? Why had he left the company so suddenly? And what were these family obligations he had referenced? "Thomas, I need you to find Carlos. I don't care what it takes or what it costs. I need to talk to him immediately." "Already on it," Thomas replied. "I've located him in Portland, Oregon. He's working for a small tech startup there. I can have his contact information to you within the hour." After ending the call, Marcus poured himself a scotch and returned to his study windows, staring out at the city lights while his mind churned through the implications of this discovery. Elena's letter had painted Jake and Luke as orphaned children in need of rescue, but the reality was far more complicated. They had family, an uncle who was not only alive and capable, but had been secretly supporting them financially. Did Carlos know about Elena's involvement with the boys? Had he been aware of her guardianship and chosen to remain in the shadows? Or was he, like Marcus, discovering connections that had been hidden from him? Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message containing Carlos's contact information. Without hesitation, despite the late hour, he dialed the number. The call went straight to voicemail, but Marcus left a detailed message explaining the situation and requesting an immediate callback. As he waited for Carlos to respond, Marcus found himself thinking about the boys sleeping at Sunshine Children's home. They had no idea that their world was about to become even more complicated, that the adults in their lives were connected in ways none of them had fully understood. Elena's letter had asked him to be patient with Jake and Luke, to show them through his actions that he wouldn't abandon them. But how could he make such promises when he didn't yet understand all the factors at play? If Carlos was their uncle and had been supporting them financially, did he have a stronger claim to guardianship than Marcus? The questions multiplied in his mind as the night wore on, each revelation opening new avenues of uncertainty. Tomorrow, he would need to have difficult conversations with Carlos, with Patricia, and potentially with Jake and Luke themselves. But tonight, he simply sat with Elena's letter in his hands, grateful for her final gift of honesty, while simultaneously overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation she had entrusted to him. Outside his windows, the city continued its restless motion, unaware that in one penthouse apartment, a man was wrestling with decisions that would shape the future of two little boys who deserved nothing more than a stable, loving home. Marcus hadn't slept more than 2 hours when his phone rang at 5:47 a.m. Carlos Martinez's name appeared on the screen, and Marcus answered immediately, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. "Marcus, I got your message," Carlos said without preamble. His voice carried a weight that Marcus had never heard before, guilt, fear, and something that sounded like relief. "I've been waiting for this call for 3 years. "Carlos, what the hell is going on?" Marcus demanded, moving to his kitchen to start coffee while they talked. "Those boys are your nephews, and you never said a word. You left the company to deal with family obligations, but you've been hiding in Portland while they live in a children's home." There was a long pause before Carlos responded. "It's not that simple, Marcus. Can we meet? I can be on a plane to San Francisco in 2 hours. There are things you need to understand about my brother, about those boys, and about why I've stayed away." "You're damn right we're going to meet," Marcus replied. "But first, tell me this. Did you know about Elena's involvement with Jake and Luke?" Another pause, this one even longer. "Yes," Carlos admitted quietly. "I knew. Elena and we've been coordinating their care for the past 3 years. She was protecting them from something, Marcus, something dangerous." The word dangerous sent a chill through Marcus. Elena's letter had mentioned Diego's abandonment and drug charges, but nothing that suggested ongoing danger. "What kind of danger?" "Not over the phone," Carlos said firmly. "Too many people could be listening. I'll be at your office by 10 a.m. And Marcus, don't go back to the children's home until we've talked. Don't take those boys anywhere public. If I'm right about what's happening, their father's associates might be watching for them." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone with a growing sense of dread. Eleanor's letter had portrayed Jake and Luke's situation as tragic, but straightforward, two abandoned children in need of love and stability. But Carlos's cryptic warnings suggested a much more complex and potentially dangerous reality. Marcus spent the morning hours researching everything he could find about Diego Martinez's criminal case. What he discovered painted a disturbing picture of a man deeply involved in international money laundering and drug trafficking. Diego hadn't been a small-time user who abandoned his children due to addiction. He had been a key player in a sophisticated criminal organization. The federal case files, which Thomas had managed to access through his contacts, revealed that Diego had been laundering money through a series of tech startups, using his computer programming skills to create legitimate-looking businesses that were actually fronts for illegal operations. When the FBI finally caught up with him, they had seized millions of dollars in assets and were still pursuing connections to other members of his organization. More troubling was the discovery that Diego's arrest had been part of a larger investigation that was still ongoing. Several of his associates remained at large, and there were indications that they might be seeking access to accounts and information that only Diego possessed. Thomas arrived at Marcus's office at 9:30, carrying additional files and wearing an expression that suggested the news wasn't good. "I've been working all night," Thomas reported, settling into a chair across from Marcus's desk. "The situation with Diego Martinez is worse than we initially thought. According to my FBI contact, there's been chatter in certain circles about Diego's children. Word is that his former associates believe he hid critical financial information before his arrest, and they think he might have used his sons as unwitting carriers." Marcus felt his blood run cold. What does that mean exactly? "Children are often used to transport sensitive information because they're less likely to be searched or suspected," Thomas explained. "Diego could have given Jake and Luke something, a toy, a piece of jewelry, even clothing, that contains coded access." to hidden accounts. His associates might believe that recovering those items could lead them to millions in laundered money. The implications were staggering. If Thomas's theory was correct, Jake and Luke weren't just innocent victims of their father's abandonment. They were potentially targets of dangerous criminals who would stop at nothing to recover stolen assets. How long have they been at risk? Marcus asked, his mind racing through the timeline. Potentially since the day they were taken into protective custody, Thomas replied. But the good news is that they've been safe at Sunshine Children's Home. Patricia runs a tight operation, and the facility has security measures in place. However, if someone wanted to access those boys, your appearance on the scene might have attracted unwanted attention. Marcus cursed under his breath, realizing that his expensive Tesla and high-profile presence at the children's home might have compromised the safety that Patricia and Elena had worked so hard to maintain. Carlos Martinez arrived precisely at 10 a.m., looking older and more worn than Marcus remembered. His former employee had always been impeccably groomed and professionally dressed, but the man who entered Marcus's office wore jeans and a wrinkled shirt with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of chronic stress and sleepless nights. "Marcus," Carlos said, extending his hand with visible reluctance. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Cut the pleasantries, Carlos," Marcus replied curtly. "Start talking. I want to know everything about your brother, those boys, and why Elena felt she needed to hide them from me." Carlos sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair before beginning his explanation. "My brother Diego was always trouble, even as kids. Brilliant with computers, but he had no moral compass. When he started getting involved with the wrong people, I tried to help him, but he was too far gone." "When did you first learn about Jake and Luke?" Marcus interrupted. "About a week after Diego was arrested," Carlos replied. "The FBI contacted me as next of kin, told me about the boys being found in that hotel room. I wanted to take them immediately, but the agents advised against." Marcus frowned. "Why would the FBI advise against family taking custody?" "Because they weren't sure if Diego's associates knew about me," Carlos explained. "If they were looking for those boys and discovered I had them, my family would become targets too. I have a wife and 2 young daughters, Marcus. I couldn't risk putting them in danger." The admission hung in the air between them, and Marcus began to understand the impossible position Carlos had found himself in. Choosing between protecting his immediate family and caring for his orphan nephews was a decision no one should have to make. "So how did Elena become involved?" Marcus asked. Carlos's expression softened slightly. "That was actually my idea. I knew Elena through her volunteer work at the children's home, and I knew she and you were financially stable and had no children of your own. I thought if she could become their guardian, they would be safe and well cared for while remaining off the radar of my brother's associates." "And you never thought to tell me about this arrangement?" Marcus's voice carried a note of betrayal. "Elena insisted on handling it alone," Carlos replied defensively. "She said you were focused on expanding the company and that bringing 2 traumatized children into your lives at that time would be overwhelming for everyone involved. I trusted her judgment." Marcus absorbed this information, recognizing Eleanor's assessment had been accurate, even if her methods had been deceptive. 3 years ago, he had been consumed with business concerns, and likely would not have responded well to the news that his wife wanted to become guardian to 2 children connected to criminal activity. "Why did you leave Donovan Tech?" Marcus asked, focusing on a detail that had always puzzled him. Carlos shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Because I was afraid my connection to Diego might compromise your company. When the FBI investigation started expanding, they began looking into Diego's family members and associates. I didn't want my employment with you to become a liability or put your business at risk." The explanation revealed another layer of sacrifice that Carlos had made to protect others. He had given up a lucrative position and promising career to ensure that his brother's criminal activities didn't taint Marcus's company. "What about the payments to Sunshine Children's Home?" Marcus pressed. "Thomas found records of monthly deposits from your account." "Elena and I worked out an arrangement," Carlos explained. "I couldn't be directly involved in the boys' lives, but I could help support them financially. Elena handled all the legal and practical aspects of their care, while I contributed to their expenses. It seemed like the best way to ensure they had everything they needed while maintaining everyone's safety." Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing the complexity of the arrangement that Elena and Carlos had maintained without his knowledge. They had essentially created a shadow support system for Jake and Luke, with Elena providing emotional care and legal protection, while Carlos contributed financial resources from a distance. "Carlos," Marcus said slowly, "what changed? Why are you willing to talk about this now? You said something about ongoing danger." Carlos's expression darkened. "Because Diego is getting out of prison next month. Early release for cooperation with federal investigators. And word on the street is that his former associates are planning to pressure him for information about those hidden accounts the moment he's free." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. The relative safety that Jake and Luke had enjoyed for 4 years was about to be shattered by their father's return to society. "What does that mean for the boys?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "It means that Diego will likely try to reclaim custody," Carlos replied. "And if he does, those boys will become pawns in a very dangerous game. Diego's associates will use whatever leverage they can to force him to reveal the location of the laundered money." Marcus felt his protective instincts surge. The thought of Jake and Luke being returned to a father who would exploit them for criminal purposes was unacceptable. "What are our options?" Marcus asked, his business mindset taking over. "Legally, what can we do to prevent Diego from getting custody?" Carlos pulled a folder from his briefcase. Elena anticipated this possibility. She filed extensive documentation about Diego's abandonment, his criminal activities, and his unsuitability as a parent. She also gathered character witnesses and expert opinions about the boys' psychological needs. But Marcus, family courts generally favor biological parents, especially when they've served their sentences and claim to be rehabilitated. "So we need to prove that returning the boys to Diego would be harmful to them," Marcus concluded. "Exactly," Carlos agreed. "And we need to do it quickly. Diego's release date is in 3 weeks. Once he's out, he'll likely file for custody immediately." Marcus stood up, pacing to his office windows as he considered their options. The situation had evolved from a personal discovery about Elena's secret life to a potential custody battle against a criminal who might exploit his own children. "Carlos, I need to ask you something directly," Marcus said, turning to face his former employee. "If we fight this custody battle, if we try to keep Jake and Luke safe from their father, are you willing to come out of the shadows? Are you prepared to be publicly identified as their uncle and a potential guardian?" Carlos was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the implications of Marcus's question. "If it means protecting those boys from my brother, then yes, my family and I will do whatever it takes." The commitment in Carlos's voice convinced Marcus that despite the deception and hidden arrangements of the past, they were now aligned in their determination to protect Jake and Luke. "Then we need to move fast," Marcus said, reaching for his phone. "I'm calling my legal team. We're going to build a case that ensures those boys never have to see their father again." Within hours of Carlos's revelation about Diego's impending release, Marcus's penthouse had transformed into a war room. His dining table was covered with legal documents, psychological evaluations, and security assessments. His attorney, Sarah Chen, had assembled a team of specialists, including a family law expert, a child psychologist, and a former FBI agent who specialized in witness protection cases. The challenge we're facing is substantial, Sarah explained to the assembled group. Diego Martinez will present himself as a reformed man who served his time and deserves a second chance with his children. The courts are generally sympathetic to fathers who claim they've turned their lives around. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the child psychologist, leaned forward with her own assessment. However, we have significant ammunition in the boys' psychological profiles. 4 years of abandonment during critical developmental stages, followed by stability with Elena's guardianship, creates a strong argument for maintaining their current environment. Disrupting that stability could cause severe psychological harm. Marcus found himself studying every detail of the boys' case files, learning things about Jake and Luke that Elena had never shared with him. Medical records showed evidence of malnutrition and neglect from their early years. Psychological evaluations documented night terrors, separation anxiety, and attachment disorders that had gradually improved under Elena's care. "There's something else we need to consider," said Detective Michael Torres, the former FBI agent Sarah had brought in as a consultant. "If Diego's associates are indeed looking for those boys, we may be dealing with more than just a custody battle. We could be looking at attempted kidnapping or worse." Carlos, who had been quietly reviewing financial documents, looked up suddenly. "I've been thinking about what Thomas said earlier, about Diego possibly using the boys to hide access codes. Marcus, did Elena ever mention Jake or Luke having any special possessions? Toys, jewelry, anything that seemed important to them?" Marcus shook his head, but then remembered something from Elena's letter. She mentioned that Luke has artistic talents and that she'd bought him professional drawing supplies. She said they were hidden in her closet. "I haven't gone through her things yet." "We should check those supplies," Torres suggested. "If Diego embedded coded information in items he gave the boys, it could be anywhere. Inside toy electronics, sewn into clothing, even encoded in seemingly innocent artwork." The thought that Jake and Luke might unknowingly possess information that made them targets sent a chill through Marcus. These children had already endured so much trauma. The idea that they carried hidden dangers made their situation even more heartbreaking. Sarah's phone buzzed with an urgent call. After a brief conversation, she hung up with a grim expression. "That was my contact at the federal courthouse. Diego Martinez filed custody papers 3 hours ago. His attorney is arguing that he's reformed, has completed substance abuse treatment, and deserves the opportunity to rebuild his relationship with his sons." 3 hours ago? Marcus demanded. "How is that possible? You said he wasn't being released for 3 weeks. "Apparently his release date was moved up," Sarah replied. "He's been out on supervised parole since yesterday. His attorney is pushing for an emergency hearing, claiming that the boys have been illegally kept from their father." The room fell, silent as everyone absorbed the implications. Their 3-week timeline had just collapsed to a matter of days, possibly hours. "We need to see those boys immediately," Dr. Rodriguez said. "I need to conduct formal psychological evaluations that can be submitted to the court, and more importantly, we need to prepare them for what's coming." Marcus nodded, reaching for his phone to call Patricia at Sunshine Children's Home. The call went straight to voicemail, which was unusual for the typically responsive supervisor. "That's odd," Marcus said, trying again with the same result. "Patricia always answers her phone." Carlos frowned, pulling out his own phone. "I have another contact there, Maria Santos, one of the night supervisors. Let me try her." The call connected, but Maria's voice was strained and anxious. "Carlos, thank God you called. We've had federal agents here all morning asking questions about Jake and Luke. They said it was related to their father's case, but something didn't feel right about them." "What kind of questions?" Carlos asked, putting the call on speaker so everyone could hear. They wanted to know about the boys' daily routines, what school they attend, who visits them, what possessions they have. Patricia refused to answer without and proper court orders, so they left. But Carlos, there's been a car parked across the street all morning with 2 men inside just watching our building." Torres immediately stood up, his expression alarmed. Those weren't federal agents. Real FBI would have proper documentation and wouldn't need to conduct surveillance after an official visit. Someone else is looking for those boys. Marcus felt his protective instincts surge. "We need to get Jake and Luke out of there immediately." "Wait," Sarah interjected. "If we move them without proper legal authority, it could be construed as kidnapping. Diego's attorney would use that against us in court. And if we leave them there and something happens to them, we'll never forgive ourselves," Marcus countered. "Besides, I have temporary emergency guardianship papers that Elena filed. That should give us legal standing." Torres nodded his agreement. "I recommend we move them to a secure location while we sort out the legal issues. My former colleagues at the Bureau can provide protection if needed." Within an hour, a carefully coordinated plan was in motion. Torres and 2 of his security associates would approach Sunshine Children's home from different directions to assess the surveillance situation. Marcus and Dr. Rodriguez would enter through the back entrance to collect Jake and Luke, while Carlos coordinated with Patricia to ensure all necessary paperwork was ready. As they prepared to leave, Marcus realized he needed to visit Elena's closet to collect the art supplies she had mentioned. In their bedroom, which he had barely entered since her death, Elena's clothes still hung exactly as she had left them. Behind a row of evening gowns, he found a large gift bag containing professional-grade colored pencils, sketchbooks, and drawing tablets. As he lifted the bag, something rattled inside one of the sketchbooks. Opening it carefully, Marcus discovered a small USB drive taped to the inside cover, along with a note in Elena's handwriting. "For Luke's digital art projects. Password is Jake and Luke 2019. Marcus stared at the USB drive, his mind racing. Was this simply art software that Elena had prepared for Luke, or was it something more significant? He quickly pocketed the drive, making a mental note to have Torres examine it later. The operation at Sunshine Children's Home went more smoothly than expected. Torres confirmed that the suspicious vehicle had left shortly before their arrival, and Patricia had Jake and Luke ready to go with small bags of their belongings. The boys seemed excited about the unexpected adventure, unaware of the danger that had prompted their hasty departure. "Are we going to stay with you now, Mr. Marcus?" Jake asked as they settled into the back seat of Marcus's car. "For a little while," Marcus replied carefully, not wanting to make promises he couldn't keep. "We're going to a safe place where we can spend some time together." Luke, clutching a worn stuffed animal, looked worried. "Is Miss Patricia in trouble? Those men who came today seemed angry when she wouldn't talk to them." The observation chilled Marcus. If Luke had witnessed the encounter with the fake federal agents, the boys were more aware of the danger than anyone had realized. Dr. Rodriguez, who was riding in the passenger seat, turned to address both boys. "Jake and Luke, sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions to keep children safe. You're not in trouble, and neither is Miss Patricia. We just want to make sure you're protected while some grown-up problems get sorted out." They drove to a secure corporate apartment that Donovan Tech maintained for visiting executives. The space was comfortable but anonymous, with no identifying features that could link it to Marcus personally. Torres had already swept the location for surveillance devices and posted security personnel in the building. Once they were settled, Marcus presented Luke with the art supplies from Elena, watching as the boy's eyes lit up with genuine delight. "Mama bought these for me?" Luke asked, reverently touching the professional pencils. "She wanted you to have them," Marcus confirmed. "She believed in your artistic talent." As Luke explored his new supplies, Jake approached Marcus with a serious expression. "Mr. Marcus, are we in danger because of our dad?" The direct question caught Marcus off guard. He had underestimated Jake's perceptiveness and ability to piece together the situation from overheard conversations. "Jake, your dad made some bad choices before you were born," Marcus said carefully. "Some people are angry with him about those choices, and we want to make sure you and Luke stay safe while the adults figure everything out." Jake nodded solemnly, seeming to understand more than a 7-year-old should need to. "Luke gets scared. When people talk about our dad, he doesn't remember much, but I remember some things, bad things." The admission broke Marcus's heart. Jake had been carrying traumatic memories alone, protecting his younger brother from painful truths about their father. "You don't have to protect Luke by yourself anymore," Marcus assured him. "That's what adults are for. You can just be a kid." Later, that evening, after the boys had fallen asleep in the apartment's second bedroom, Marcus finally had a chance to examine the USB drive he'd found in Elena's art supplies. Torres connected it to a secure laptop and accessed the files using Elena's password. What they discovered sent shockwaves through the entire team. The drive contained copies of encrypted financial records, account numbers, and what appeared to be access codes for offshore banking systems. Elena had somehow obtained evidence of Diego's money laundering operations. "This changes everything," Torres said grimly. "If Diego's associates knew Elena had this information, it explains why they might be targeting the boys. They probably think she passed this information to them before she died." Marcus stared at the screen, overwhelmed by yet another revelation about his wife's secret activities. "How did Elena get this information?" Carlos looked uncomfortable. "Diego contacted her about 6 months before his arrest. He claimed he wanted to set up trust funds for the boys, but I think he was actually trying to hide assets from the FBI. Elena played along to gather evidence." "She was working with law enforcement?" Marcus asked, astonished. "Not officially," Carlos replied, "but she copied everything Diego gave her and planned to turn it over to the FBI after his arrest. Her illness prevented her from following through." Sarah leaned forward, her legal mind already working through the implications. This USB drive could be the key to keeping Diego away from those boys permanently. If we can prove he was trying to use Elena to hide criminal assets, it demonstrates ongoing criminal intent and makes him unfit for custody. Marcus felt a surge of admiration for Elena's courage and foresight. Even while battling cancer, she had been gathering evidence to protect Jake and Luke from their father's criminal associations. "Tomorrow, we hand this evidence over to the FBI," Marcus decided, "and we use it to ensure that Diego Martinez never gets within 100 miles of those boys again." Outside the apartment windows, the city lights twinkled innocently, but Marcus knew that somewhere in those shadows, dangerous people were searching for 2 little boys who had become the center of a battle between justice and greed. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension as Marcus, Carlos, and their legal team prepared for the emergency custody hearing that would determine Jake and Luke's fate. Diego Martinez sat across the courtroom with his public defender, looking every inch the reformed man his attorney was portraying. Clean-shaven, wearing a modest suit, and maintaining an expression of earnest determination. Marcus studied Diego carefully, searching for any resemblance to the boys. The physical similarities were there in the bone structure and coloring, but where Jake and Luke radiated innocence and vulnerability, their father's eyes held a calculating coldness that made Marcus's skin crawl. Judge Rebecca Morrison, a veteran family court justice known for her no-nonsense approach, called the hearing to order. "This is an emergency petition for custody restoration filed by Diego Martinez regarding his minor children, Jake and Luke Martinez, currently under temporary guardianship arrangements." Diego's attorney, David Fletcher, rose first. "Your Honor, my client has served his debt to society and completed all court-mandated rehabilitation programs. He seeks only what any father deserves, the right to rebuild his relationship with his children and provide them with the stability of family bonds. Fletcher painted a picture of a man who had made mistakes but learned from them, emphasizing Diego's computer programming skills and his plans to establish a legitimate technology. Consulting business. The presentation was polished and persuasive, exactly what Marcus had feared. Sarah Chen stood to present their counter-argument, her voice steady and professional. Your Honor, we submit that returning these children to Mr. Martinez would cause irreparable psychological harm and potentially place them in physical danger. She methodically presented evidence of Diego's abandonment, the boys' traumatic early years, and their subsequent stability under Elena's guardianship. Dr. Rodriguez's psychological evaluations painted a clear picture of children who had finally found security and were thriving in their current environment. Furthermore, Your Honor, Sarah continued, we have evidence that Mr. Martinez's criminal activities extend beyond his conviction and may pose ongoing risks to these children's safety. Fletcher immediately objected. Your Honor, my client was convicted and sentenced based on specific charges. The prosecution cannot introduce unsubstantiated allegations about additional criminal activity. Judge Morrison sustained the objection, but Marcus could see the curiosity in her eyes. Sarah had planted the seed without revealing their trump card, Elena's USB drive and the ongoing FBI investigation. Mr. Martinez, Judge Morrison addressed Diego directly, you abandoned these children for 3 days when they were 3 years old. They were found malnourished and traumatized. How do you explain this action to the court? Diego stood, his expression showing what appeared to be genuine remorse. Your Honor, I was struggling with addiction and making terrible decisions. I know there's no excuse for leaving my boys, but I was not in my right mind. I've spent 4 years in prison thinking about that mistake every single day. His voice broke slightly as he continued. I've completed substance abuse treatment, anger management courses, and parenting classes. I've found faith and purpose. All I want is the chance to be the father Jake and Luke deserve. The performance was convincing, and Marcus felt his heart sink as he watched Judge Morrison's expression soften slightly. Diego was playing the redemption card expertly, presenting himself as a man transformed by his time in prison. Dr. Rodriguez was called to testify about the boys' psychological state. Her testimony was compelling, describing their progress under Elena's care and the potential trauma of removing them from their stable environment. Doctor, Fletcher challenged during cross-examination, isn't it true that children are generally more resilient than adults assume, and that family bonds with biological parents are typically stronger than artificial guardianship arrangements? While children can be resilient, Dr. Rodriguez replied carefully, Jake and Luke have specific trauma histories related to abandonment by their father. Forcing them back into that relationship without proper preparation and ongoing support could trigger severe psychological regression. The hearing continued for 3 hours, with witnesses testifying about the boys' current well-being, Diego's rehabilitation, and the complex legal questions surrounding Elena's guardianship. Throughout it all, Jake and Luke waited in a secure conference room with a court-appointed advocate, unaware that their future was being decided just down the hall. During a brief recess, Torres approached Marcus with urgent information. I just heard from my FBI contact. They've been tracking communications from Diego's former associates. There's been increased chatter about the boys since Diego's release, and they believe someone is planning to make a move within the next 48 hours. The revelation added a new dimension of urgency to the proceedings. If Judge Morrison awarded custody to Diego, she would unknowingly be placing Jake and Luke directly in the path of dangerous criminals. When court reconvened, Sarah made a bold decision. Your Honor, I request permission to present additional evidence that has just come to light regarding Mr. Martinez's ongoing criminal associations and the immediate danger they pose to these children. Fletcher objected strenuously, but Judge Morrison's curiosity was piqued. "I'll allow limited testimony, but it must be directly relevant to the children's welfare." Torres was sworn in as an expert witness on organized crime and child safety. His testimony about the communications intercepts and the ongoing threat from Diego's associates sent a visible shock through the courtroom. "Agent Torres," Judge Morrison asked, "are you testifying that these children are currently targets of criminal organizations?" "Yes, Your Honor. Based on federal intelligence, Jake and Luke Martinez are believed to possess information or items that Diego Martinez's former associates consider valuable. Their safety cannot be guaranteed if they are returned to their father's custody." Diego's face went pale as Torres testified, and Marcus saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear, but also a calculating assessment of his options. Fletcher scrambled to discredit Torres's testimony, arguing that unsubstantiated intelligence reports shouldn't influence custody decisions, but the damage was done. Judge Morrison had heard enough to understand that this case involved far more than a simple custody dispute. "Mr. Martinez," Judge Morrison addressed Diego directly, "Agent Torres's testimony suggests that your past criminal activities may continue to endanger your children. Do you have any knowledge of threats against Jake and Luke?" Diego stood slowly, and for a moment Marcus thought he might confess everything. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, I don't know anything about threats against my boys. I served my time and I just want to be their father. If someone is threatening them because of my past, then maybe they're safer where they are for now." The admission stunned everyone in the courtroom. Diego was essentially conceding that he couldn't protect his own children from the consequences of his actions. Fletcher whispered urgently with his client, clearly frustrated by this unexpected development. After a heated exchange, Diego stood again. "Your Honor, I'd like to request supervised visitation rights rather than full custody. I want to rebuild my relationship with Jake and Luke gradually, when it's safe for them." Judge Morrison studied Diego carefully, searching for signs of manipulation or genuine concern. "Mr. Martinez, are you withdrawing your petition for full custody?" "I'm modifying it, Your Honor. I want what's best for my boys, even if that means waiting until the situation with my former associates is resolved." Sarah seized the opportunity immediately. "Your Honor, we would support a supervised visitation arrangement with strict conditions, meetings only in secure locations, psychological evaluations for the children before and after each visit, and immediate suspension of contact if any security concerns arise." Judge Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "I'm going to order a 2-week continuance to allow for further investigation of the security concerns raised by Agent Torres. In the meantime, Jake and Luke will remain in their current guardianship arrangement. Mr. Martinez, you will be granted 1 supervised visit per week at a location to be determined by the court." As the gavel fell, Marcus felt a mixture of relief and continued anxiety. They had won a temporary victory, but the underlying dangers remained. Diego's unexpected concession suggested he might genuinely care about his son's welfare, but it also confirmed that the criminal threats were real and immediate. Outside the courtroom, Diego approached Marcus and Carlos with his attorney present. His demeanor was different now, less polished, more desperate. "Mr. Donovan," Diego said quietly, "I need to talk to you privately. There are things about my former associates that you need to know. Things that could help protect my boys." Marcus studied Diego's face, searching for signs of deception. "Why should I trust anything you say?" "Because those men will kill me if they can't find what they're looking for," Diego replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "And if they can't get To me, they'll take Jake and Luke instead. I may be a lot of things, but I won't let my children pay for my mistakes. Carlos stepped forward, his expression hard. What exactly are these men looking for, Diego? Diego glanced around nervously before answering. Access codes to accounts containing $12 million. I hid the information before my arrest. But I never told them where. They think I gave it to Elena, and now they think she passed it to the boys. Marcus felt his blood run cold as he realized the full scope of what Elena had discovered. The USB drive in his possession contained information worth killing for, and Diego's associates wouldn't stop until they recovered it. We need to talk, Marcus said grimly. All of us. Because if you're telling the truth, those boys are in more danger than any of us realized. As they left the courthouse, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that their legal victory was only the beginning of a much more dangerous battle. The men hunting for Diego's hidden fortune wouldn't be deterred by court orders or custody arrangements. They would find another way to get what they wanted, and Jake and Luke remained the most vulnerable targets in a deadly game of greed and desperation. The secure conference room at Marcus's office building felt like a pressure cooker as 5 adults sat around a polished table, each carrying secrets that could determine whether Jake and Luke lived or died. Diego Martinez sat across from Marcus, flanked by his attorney and a federal marshal who had been assigned as protection detail, following Torres's testimony about imminent threats. Before we begin, Sarah Chen announced, I want it clear that anything discussed here regarding ongoing criminal activity will be reported to federal authorities. Mr. Martinez, you're here voluntarily, but you should understand the implications. Diego nodded grimly. I understand. At this point, cooperation with law enforcement is my only chance of keeping my sons alive. Marcus leaned forward, his business instincts demanding concrete information. Tell us exactly what your associates are looking for and why they believe. Jake and Luke have it. Diego's hands trembled slightly as he began his explanation. 3 months before my arrest, I knew the FBI was closing in. I had access to approximately $12 million spread across offshore accounts, money I had laundered for a drug cartel based in Colombia. I created a complex encryption system to hide the account numbers and access codes. What kind of encryption? Torres asked, his law enforcement background focused on technical details. I embedded the information in seemingly innocent digital files, children's games, educational software, even digital art programs, Diego replied. The idea was that no one would suspect interactive software designed for kids to contain financial data worth millions. Carlos, who had been silent until now, suddenly straightened. Digital art programs. Diego, what exactly did you give Elena? Diego's face went pale as he realized the implications of his brother's question. I gave her a complete software package for the boys. Educational games, drawing programs, interactive learning tools. I told her it was for their development, to help them with school. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he remembered the USB drive hidden in Luke's art supplies. Elena hadn't just discovered Diego's criminal information by accident. She had been unknowingly given the keys to his entire operation. Mr. Martinez, the federal marshal interjected, how many people know about this encryption system? 3 men who worked directly with me. Victor Restrepo, the cartel's financial coordinator, Anthony Kim, a computer programmer, and Manuel Santos, who handled logistics, Diego replied. All 3 are still free, and all 3 know that Elena was the last person I had contact with before my arrest. Torres was already on his phone, presumably alerting his FBI contacts about the specific names and threats. The situation had escalated from general danger to specific, identifiable criminals with clear motives for targeting the boys. There's something else, Diego continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Victor Restrepo doesn't just want the money back. He wants to make an example of what happens when someone steals from the cartel. If he gets his hands on my boys. He couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone in the room understood the implication. This wasn't just about recovering stolen assets. It was about sending a message that would deter future betrayals. Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. Diego, if you're telling the truth about wanting to protect Jake and Luke, then we need to work together. I have information that could help end this threat permanently. Sarah immediately raised her hand in caution. Marcus, before you share anything, consider the legal implications. Once information is disclosed, we can't control how it's used. The boy's safety is more important than legal complications, Marcus replied firmly. He turned to Diego. Elena found your encryption system. She copied everything and was planning to turn it over to the FBI before she got sick. Diego's eyes widened with a mixture of hope and terror. She has the account information? All of it? Had, Marcus corrected. Elena died 3 years ago, but she left the evidence. The question is whether we use it to bargain with your associates or hand it directly to the FBI. Torres ended his phone call and rejoined the conversation. I just spoke with Agent Rebecca Foster, who's leading the task force on this cartel. She's willing to offer Diego full witness protection in exchange for the account information and testimony against Restrepo's organization. What about Jake and Luke? Carlos demanded. Would they be included in witness protection? That's complicated, Torres admitted. The boys would need to disappear completely. New identities, relocation. Far from here, no contact with anyone from their current lives. They'd lose everyone except their father. Marcus felt his heart break at the thought of Jake and Luke being forced to abandon the stability they had finally found. There has to be another option, some way to neutralize the threat without destroying their lives. Diego leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully. What if we gave Restrepo what he wants, but not how he expects to get it? Explain, Sarah prompted. The $12 million is sitting in accounts that require two-factor authentication, the encrypted codes I created, plus biometric verification that only I can provide, Diego explained. If I transfer the money back to the cartel voluntarily, along with additional information about their operations that I've kept as insurance, it might satisfy their need for revenge while protecting my sons. Torres shook his head immediately. Returning stolen money to a criminal organization violates about 15 federal laws. The Bureau would never approve that approach. But what if the money never actually reaches them? Marcus asked, his strategic mind working through possibilities. What if we coordinate with the FBI to make the transfer, but ensure it leads to arrests instead of successful recovery? The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications of Marcus's suggestion. It was essentially proposing to use Diego as bait in an elaborate sting operation, with Jake and Luke's safety hanging in the balance. Diego spoke first. I'll do it. If there's a chance to end this threat and keep my boys safe, I'll take any risk necessary. The logistics would be incredibly complex, Torres warned. Restrepo isn't stupid. He'll verify every aspect of the transaction before exposing himself to arrest. That's where Elena's evidence becomes crucial, Marcus realized. We have detailed records of the cartel's operations, account structures, and communication methods. The FBI could use that information to anticipate Restrepo's verification processes. As they discussed the technical aspects of a potential sting operation, Marcus's phone buzzed with an urgent message from the security team protecting Jake and Luke. His blood ran cold as he read, "Attempted breach at safe house. 2 unidentified men tried to access building through service entrance. Subjects fled when confronted by security. Boys are safe but shaken." They found them, Marcus announced grimly, showing the message to the group. Restrepo's people located the safe house, Diego's face went white. How is that possible? I thought your security was tight. Torres was already coordinating with his contacts. Professional criminals have resources we can't always anticipate. The important thing is that the boys are safe, and we now know the threat is immediate. We need to move them again, Marcus decided, somewhere completely off the grid while we finalize this sting operation. Carlos had been quietly considering their options. I have a cabin in the mountains, about 3 hours north of here. It's registered under my wife's maiden name, completely isolated, and has satellite communication capabilities. The boys could stay there with security personnel while we deal with Restrepo. That's assuming they'll go willingly, Dr. Rodriguez pointed out, speaking for the first time in the meeting. Jake and Luke have already been through multiple relocations in the past week. Another move, especially to an unfamiliar location, could trigger severe anxiety responses. Marcus thought about the boys' resilience and their growing trust in him. I'll go with them. If I'm there, they'll feel safer about the situation. Absolutely not, Sarah objected immediately. If you're present at a safe house during an active FBI operation against a violent cartel, you become a liability and a target. Then, what do you suggest? Marcus demanded, his frustration boiling over. Those boys have lost their mother, been abandoned by their father, and now they're being hunted by criminals. Someone needs to provide them with stability and protection. Diego stood up suddenly, his decision crystallizing. I'll go with them. The suggestion stunned everyone in the room. Carlos was the first to object. Diego, you can't be serious. You're the primary target. Being near the boys puts them in more danger, not less. Think about it logically, Diego argued. If Restrepo believes I'm with Jake and Luke, he'll focus his attention on finding us rather than splitting his resources. Meanwhile, the FBI can use that concentration of effort to set up their sting operation. Torres considered the proposal from a tactical perspective. It's risky, but it could work. If we can convince Restrepo that Diego is trying to use the boys to access the hidden accounts, it would draw all the threats to one location where we can control the variables. Marcus found himself in the unexpected position of trusting Diego Martinez with the lives of the children he had come to love. Everything in his business experience warned against relying on a convicted criminal, but his paternal instincts recognized something genuine in Diego's desperation to protect his sons. If we do this, Marcus said slowly, there need to be conditions. Federal agents on site, constant communication with headquarters, and an extraction plan if anything goes wrong. Agreed, Diego replied immediately. I'll submit to any monitoring or restrictions necessary. All I want is to keep Jake and Luke safe while we end this threat. As the meeting concluded and arrangements were made for the mountain cabin operation, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that November afternoon when he found 2 crying boys at Elena's grave. He had gone from a successful but isolated businessman to a man willing to trust his former enemy in order to protect 2 children who had become the center of his world. The next 48 hours would determine whether their unconventional alliance could outwit a violent cartel and create a safe future for Jake and Luke, or whether the sins of their father's past would finally claim them all. The mountain cabin sat perched on a ridge overlooking a vast valley, its weathered cedar walls blending seamlessly with the ancient pine forest that surrounded it. 3 hours north of San Francisco, Carlos's hidden retreat felt like a sanctuary from another era, a place where the relentless pace of modern life gave way to the timeless rhythms of nature. For Jake and Luke Martinez, who had spent their short lives moving between institutional settings and temporary arrangements, the cabin represented something extraordinary, their first taste of genuine peace. Marcus stood on the wraparound deck, nursing his morning coffee, while watching the boys explore their temporary haven with the unbridled curiosity of children finally free from fear. Jake had discovered a weather station mounted on the cabin's roof and was meticulously recording temperature and barometric pressure readings in a notebook, his mathematical mind fascinated by the patterns he was beginning to recognize. Luke had claimed a sunny corner of the deck as his art studio, where he spent hours sketching the wildlife that seemed unafraid of human presence: chipmunks, blue jays, and the occasional deer that ventured close to the cabin. "They look different here," Diego observed quietly, emerging from the cabin with his own coffee. The past 10 days at the mountain retreat had transformed not just the boys, but the relationship between the two men who had once viewed each other with suspicion and hostility. Diego's willingness to risk everything for his son's safety had earned Marcus's grudging respect, while Marcus's unwavering devotion to the children's welfare had shown Diego what authentic parental love actually looked like. "It's the first time they felt truly safe," Marcus replied, his eyes tracking Jake as the boy carefully measured rainfall in a mason jar he had positioned to catch water from the roof's edge. "Elena used to say that children need to feel secure before they can really grow. I'm finally understanding what she meant." Diego nodded, his weathered face reflecting a mixture of wonder and profound regret. "I've missed so much. 4 crucial years of their development. First words of real sentences, learning to read, developing their personalities. Luke's artistic talent, Jake's analytical brilliance. How do I even begin to bridge that gap?" Marcus set down his coffee cup and studied Diego carefully. During their enforced time together at the cabin, he had watched this man struggle to connect with sons who regarded him as a well-meaning stranger rather than their father. The effort was genuine, even if the results were sometimes awkward. "You don't try to reclaim lost years," Marcus said finally, his voice carrying the wisdom Elena had taught him about accepting life's imperfections. "You invest everything you have into the years that remain. Elena showed me that dwelling on missed opportunities steals energy from present possibilities." Their philosophical conversation was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of multiple vehicles navigating the winding mountain road that led to their refuge. Agent Rebecca Foster emerged from the lead SUV, followed by Torres and a small convoy of federal agents who had become familiar faces during the intense week of coordinated operations that had finally neutralized the cartel threat. "Gentlemen," Agent Foster announced with a satisfaction that radiated from her confident posture, "I have news that I believe will bring this chapter of your lives to a definitive close." Marcus and Diego exchanged glances, both men having learned to be cautious about premature celebrations during their recent experiences with law enforcement promises. Victor Restrepo, Anthony Kim, and Manuel Santos are now in federal custody, along with 14 other members of their organization, Foster continued, consulting her tablet for specific details. "The $12 million has been recovered and will be distributed to victims of their various criminal enterprises. More importantly for your situation, our intelligence analysts have confirmed that their entire leadership structure has been permanently dismantled." Diego's shoulders sagged with relief so profound that Marcus worried he might collapse. The weight of 4 years spent looking over his shoulder, wondering when his past would finally catch up with him and his children, was finally being lifted. "What does this mean for Diego's legal status?" Marcus asked, his business instincts focused on practical implications and long-term security. "The district attorney has agreed to modify Mr. Martinez's parole conditions in recognition of his invaluable cooperation with our investigation," Torres explained, pulling out official documentation. "He'll be permitted to remain in the Bay Area with supervised visitation rights for his sons, rather than being relocated into the Federal Witness Protection Program." The significance of this decision wasn't lost on any of them. Witness protection would have meant Diego disappearing forever, leaving Jake and Luke to wonder what had happened to their father just as they were beginning to rebuild some kind of relationship with him. And the boy's safety, Marcus pressed, his protective instincts still operating at maximum alert, despite the apparent resolution of their immediate threats. There are no remaining associates with both the knowledge and resources to continue pursuing the boys, Foster assured him. Our investigation has been thorough, and we've accounted for every individual who had access to information about Diego's encryption system. Jake and Luke can return to their normal lives without any security concerns. As the federal agents completed their paperwork and departed with promises to finalize all legal documentation within 48 hours, Marcus found himself facing a conversation he had been simultaneously anticipating and dreading. The immediate danger was over, but the fundamental question of the boy's permanent future remained unresolved. "Marcus," Diego said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he had been preparing for this moment. "We need to discuss custody arrangements now that the crisis has passed." They settled into the cabin's rustic living room, its stone fireplace and hand-hewn log walls creating an atmosphere that felt both intimate and timeless. Through the large windows, they could see Jake teaching Luke how to use a compass he had found in the cabin's collection of outdoor equipment, the older twin patiently explaining magnetic declination while his brother nodded with serious concentration. "I need to say something that might sound strange coming from me," Diego began, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've been watching you with my sons this past week, and I've seen something that I'm not sure I can ever provide them." Marcus remained silent, sensing that Diego needed to express thoughts that had clearly been weighing heavily on him during their mountain retreat. "When Elena died, you became their anchor without even realizing it," Diego continued, his voice growing stronger as he found his words. "You gave them emotional stability at the most crucial moment of their young lives. You've shown them what it means to have an adult who puts their needs first, who keeps promises, who creates safety through consistency rather than just good intentions." "Diego, they're your sons," Marcus interjected, though his heart was racing. With hope at the direction of this conversation. "They're our sons," Diego corrected firmly. "Yours, mine, Carlos's, and somehow still Elena's, even though she's gone. But Marcus, I need you to understand something important. These boys don't need to choose between the adults who love them. They deserve all of us working together to give them the best possible future." Before Marcus could fully process the implications of Diego's words, the sound of excited voices interrupted their conversation. Jake burst through the cabin door, his face flushed with the kind of excitement that comes from genuine discovery. "Papa Marcus, Dad, come quickly. Luke found something incredible." Both men noticed that Jake had used different titles for each of them, Papa Marcus and Dad, suggesting that the boy had already begun creating his own framework for their complex family structure. They followed Jake outside to where Luke was kneeling beside what appeared to be a small cave entrance, partially hidden behind a cluster of granite boulders that had been weathered smooth by countless seasons. The boy's artistic eye had noticed something that the adults had completely overlooked during their security sweeps of the property. "There are paintings inside," Luke explained breathlessly, his eyes bright with wonder. "Really old ones, like the pictures we studied in school about Native American art. They're telling some kind of story." Agent Foster, who had returned to retrieve some equipment her team had left behind, overheard Luke's announcement and approached with professional curiosity. "This entire mountain range has significant archaeological importance," she confirmed, examining the cave entrance. "There are several documented Native American sites throughout these peaks. If Luke has discovered cave paintings, they could represent a significant historical find." As the group carefully entered the small cave, their flashlights revealed faded but distinct figures painted on the smooth rock walls. The images depicted families, hunting scenes, and what appeared to be ceremonial gatherings where different tribal groups came together. Jake, ever the analyst, studied the paintings with intense concentration before making an observation that stunned the adults. "The story shows different families joining together," he announced, tracing the faded figures with his finger. "See how these people have different clothes and symbols, but they're all taking care of the same children. They're sharing responsibility for protecting the whole community." The innocent interpretation struck everyone present with its profound relevance to their own situation. Luke had accidentally discovered ancient artwork that depicted the same themes they were living. Different groups uniting to protect and nurture their community's most vulnerable members. "Just like our family," Luke said simply, looking up at the circle of adults who had become his unconventional support system. "We're all different people, but we take care of each other." Marcus felt tears welling in his eyes as he realized that these two remarkable children had found a way to articulate the complex family dynamic that the adults had been struggling to define. They weren't seeking a traditional nuclear family structure. They were embracing something more expansive and inclusive. That evening, as they prepared dinner together in the cabin's well-equipped kitchen, Carlos arrived with his own family. His wife Maria and daughters Sofia and Isabella transformed the quiet mountain retreat into a bustling household filled with Spanish conversations, laughter, and the comfortable chaos that comes with multiple children playing together. Jake and Luke immediately connected with their older cousins, who treated them with the easy acceptance that children show for new family members. Sofia, who was 9, took charge of organizing outdoor games, while Isabella, 7, bonded with Luke over their shared interest in drawing and crafts. "I've been thinking about our earlier conversation," Carlos told Marcus and Diego as they watched. "The children play an elaborate game of hide and seek among the pine trees. Maria and I want to be more actively involved in Jake and Luke's daily lives. We want them to understand that they have family connections beyond just the three of us." Diego smiled, his expression reflecting genuine gratitude for his brothers' support and inclusion. Elena would be amazed to see them surrounded by so much love and attention. She always worried that they would feel isolated and different. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Dr. Rodriguez arrived for her scheduled psychological evaluation of the boys. Her assessments over the past week had documented remarkable improvements in both children's emotional stability, confidence, and social interactions. "How are they progressing?" Marcus asked as she completed her observations and interviews. "Better than I dared hope when we first met," Dr. Rodriguez replied, reviewing her notes. "The combination of resolved external threats, consistent care from multiple loving adults, and the freedom to simply be children has allowed them to heal in ways that traditional therapy alone could never achieve. They're finally able to relax and develop normally." "What about long-term considerations?" Diego asked, clearly concerned about potential psychological impacts of their unconventional family structure. "Children are remarkably adaptable when their basic needs for safety, love, and consistency are met," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "Jake and Luke have those needs fulfilled by multiple adults who clearly communicate and coordinate their care. In many ways, they're more secure than children in traditional families, where all the responsibility falls on just two parents." That night, as the extended family gathered around a campfire outside the cabin, Jake made an announcement that surprised everyone with its sophistication and insight. "I've been thinking about what we should call ourselves," he said, with the serious expression he wore when working through complex mathematical problems. "We're definitely a family, but we're not like the families in books or TV shows. Maybe we're more like a constellation family." "What's a constellation family?" Luke asked, intrigued by his brother's creative terminology. "In astronomy, stars that are really far apart in space can still be connected to form patterns and tell Stories, Jake explained patiently. Even though we all live in different places and have different roles, we're still connected. We're still part of the same picture in the sky. Marcus felt his heart swell with pride and amazement at Jake's wisdom and creativity. This 7-year-old had found a way to describe their unconventional family structure that honored everyone's role while acknowledging the love and commitment that bound them together across physical distance and different responsibilities. "I love that," Maria said warmly, pulling both boys closer to her on the log where they were sitting. "A constellation family, different stars shining together to create something beautiful." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the familiar cemetery where this extraordinary journey had begun, but this time he wasn't alone with his grief. Jake and Luke flanked him at Elena's marble headstone, each carrying flowers they had grown in the rooftop garden they were cultivating at Marcus's penthouse. The entire top floor had been transformed into a family space where the boys could plant, nurture, and watch things grow, a metaphor for their own healing and development. "Hi, Mama," Luke said softly, placing his carefully arranged bouquet near the headstone. "We have so much to tell you about everything that's happened." "Papa Marcus officially adopted us last month," Jake added, his voice filled with pride and security. "But Dad still visits every week, and Uncle Carlos taught me how to program a robot that can solve math problems. And Tia Maria and the girls are teaching me Spanish," Luke continued, using the family terms that had naturally developed. "Dr. Rodriguez says we're the most resilient kids she's ever worked with." I looked up resilient, and it means we can handle difficult things and still be okay afterward. Marcus knelt between the boys, placing his own flowers beside theirs, white roses that had been Elena's favorites. "Elena, I hope you can see how extraordinary your boys have become. They've exceeded every hope you expressed in your letter. They've taught me that family isn't about perfection or following traditional patterns. It's about showing up consistently, keeping the promises that matter, and loving each other through both celebrations and challenges." As they walked back toward the parking lot, Luke slipped his small hand into Marcus's, while Jake walked slightly ahead, pointing out interesting cloud formations and explaining the meteorological processes that created different shapes in the sky. The boy who had once suffered from severe anxiety and physical symptoms of trauma now moved through the world with confidence, curiosity, and an analytical mind that impressed his advanced placement teachers. "Papa Marcus," Luke said quietly, his artistic sensibilities often leading to profound observations. "Do you think Mama somehow knew this would happen? That we'd all find each other and become a constellation family?" Marcus squeezed Luke's hand gently, remembering Elena's letter and her remarkable faith that somehow the people she loved would find their way to each other despite the obstacles and complications. "I think your mama was extraordinarily wise about matters of the heart," Marcus replied thoughtfully. "I think she understood that love has a way of bringing the right people together, even when the path seems impossible to navigate." Diego was waiting for them in the parking lot, ready for his scheduled Saturday visit with the boys. The relationship between him and Marcus had evolved into something neither man had ever expected. A genuine partnership based on mutual respect, shared commitment to Jake and Luke's welfare, and complementary strengths that benefited the children. Diego now worked as a computer programming instructor at a community college, using his technical expertise to help others while building a completely legitimate career. His weekly visits with Jake and Luke had become treasured traditions, where he shared his technological knowledge while learning about their academic achievements, artistic projects, and social development. "Ready for our coding session?" "Diego," asked Jake, who nodded enthusiastically. Their Saturday afternoons had become precious time where Diego could contribute to his son's education while Jake taught his father about the advanced mathematical theories he was exploring in his accelerated academic program. "Can we work on my digital art software today?" Luke asked, holding up his tablet. "I want to finish the constellation painting that shows our whole family." As Marcus watched Diego drive away with the boys for their visit, he reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had occurred in all their lives. 12 months ago, he had been a successful but fundamentally lonely man whose greatest achievements were measured in corporate acquisitions and financial growth. Today, his greatest achievement was being an integral part of a family constellation that had formed around two children who needed love, stability, and multiple adults committed to their welfare. His phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia. "At Sunshine Children's Home, Mr. Donovan, we have a new arrival, a little girl who reminds me so much of how Jake and Luke were when they first came to us. She's been through trauma, but she has their same resilience and intelligence. Would you and the boys like to visit sometime? I think she could benefit from seeing hope in action." Marcus smiled as he typed his response. "We'll be there tomorrow afternoon. Our constellation always has room for more stars that need to shine." The story that had begun with tragedy, secrets, and the overwhelming grief of loss had evolved into something beautiful, lasting, and infinitely expandable. Elena's greatest gift hadn't been simply revealing Jake and Luke's existence. It had been her profound faith that love could overcome any obstacle and create families in the most unexpected and wonderful ways. As Marcus drove through the familiar city streets toward home, where Jake and Luke would return that evening to help him prepare dinner and share stories about their day with Diego, he understood that life's greatest treasures often arrive disguised as complications or disruptions. Two crying boys at a cemetery had seemed like an intrusion into his carefully ordered existence, but they had actually been the answer to questions about meaning and purpose that he hadn't even known he was asking. They had taught him that true wealth was measured not in bank accounts, but in the trust of children who called him Papa, that success meant creating security for others, rather than just accumulating assets for himself, and that the most important promises weren't negotiated in boardrooms, but whispered at bedsides and kept through daily actions rather than grand gestures. In the end, Elena had been completely right about everything that mattered. Love did multiply rather than divide when shared generously. Families could be formed through choice and commitment rather than just biological connections. And the most wounded people could heal each other if they were brave enough to remain open to unexpected possibilities. The constellation family she had envisioned in her final letter was now complete and thriving. Bound together by something far stronger than legal documents or blood relationships, they were united by the unshakable commitment to protect, nurture, and celebrate the love they had discovered in each other against all odds. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us.